Okay, we'll give it a minute as everybody is coming in. Um, Great to see everybody for our annual publication of Poverty Focus. However, this is the first time we have done a webinar launch, so bear with me if we have any teething difficulties. I will again just give it another minute or two and then we will head on into it. Very conscious, I was only pointed out to me this morning that we are 4 weeks to Christmas, so I suppose a little bit of a downer to be talking about annual poverty figures with one more month to go till Christmas, but there we are, unfortunately. Okay, I am going to, I suppose, just do the usual housekeeping. My name is Suzanne Rogers. I'm Research and Policy Analyst with Social Justice Ireland. This is our annual publication of Poverty Focus, where, again, we're just looking at the available data through a particular lens. This year, it has been a focus on cost of living. And also, the usual rules will apply. The document should be up on our website around now, all going well. It might take a few refreshes. The Q&A button is there for, again, everybody to be able to ask questions, share, make comment. And again, everybody knows where we are. Feel free to keep in touch as well. So again, this is really just a whistle stop over the actual publication because this is a lunchtime webinar. People need to be away with their sandwich. So I'm going to share screen now. And again, people can let me know what they can see there. Fingers crossed you have that there in front of you. So again, Poverty Focus annual publication, really just, I suppose, constantly highlighting the issues that are being experienced across Ireland in that space, because the headlines we get consistently are country at full employment, country with budget surpluses, wealthy Western country. And really what we're doing is, again, just sort of setting out how poverty is measured, where the poverty line is, who the groups in our society who are most exposed to living life below the poverty line. And as I said, again, we pay particular attention to the impact of recent rises in the cost of living. And we had a lot of news headlines and a lot of radio and media, I suppose, attention paid to the sharp increase in the cost of a tank of oil. So anybody who is using solid fuels and oils to heat their home over the winter. And again, we're just into a cold snap now. As I said, 4 weeks to Christmas. This is particularly pertinent. So again, this is all based on the latest Silk CSO statistics. And I don't know if anybody remembers back when there was an Instagram account. There was a Social Justice Ireland Instagram account created a couple of years back, and it wasn't ours. And I always used to say, I'm sure people will understand that as an organisation, we don't have an opinion on fake tan or Kanye West or whatever else this particular account was discussing at the time. And now I have to go and quote Kanye West in this. But I mean, he really sums it up when he says, having money isn't everything, not having it is. And that's the lived reality for people who are living on a median income below the poverty line. In Ireland at the moment, 11.7% of us are living below the poverty line. That's almost 630,000 people, which again is an extraordinary figure in what is, I repeat, a wealthy Western country. Very disturbingly, again, 190,000 of those are children. So what we can see really is that underlying poverty rate, we're seeing an unequal distribution of direct income. Many of you will know from the work that you do that the social welfare system around does a huge amount of heavy lifting in order to be able to move transfers again into the pockets and the households of low income households. But even when all that is taken into account, this is the current state of play in Ireland at the moment. The poverty line then is measured. This is, again, always up for discussion, always up for debate. But at the moment, the agreed measure is a line that's drawn at 60% of median income. Anybody living below that is deemed to be at risk of poverty or living in poverty. So the way the CSO do it is they will look at the 2023 income when they look at the 2024 poverty statistics. So for that particular set of data, The poverty line is €344.91 a week. And again, anybody who is familiar with this, works in this space, will immediately know the massive gap between the poverty line and what average social welfare incomes provide into the household. So it's considerable gap, 120, €110 a week for many people. So if you are reliant on a social welfare income for your main source of income, really what we're saying is that you are going to be living a life in poverty. You are going to be living under this particular line. And I suppose again, it always queries then that conversation about why anybody would make a lifestyle choice, which is sometimes the pushback that we hear, why somebody would make a lifestyle choice to live on social welfare. That is not the case. People are reliant on that welfare transfer, but this is unfortunately the situation that they're going to find themselves in once they do. So I suppose how much is enough then? So what we would do in Social Justice Ireland is recalibrate that then to look at what the poverty line would be when we look at income, projected incomes then for 2025. So according to our calculations, in 2025, the average weekly disposable income required to avoid poverty would actually be €366 for one individual. And again, in the document, there'll be all of the different family types as well, will all be there. So again, it's a considerable amount of money that's needed in order just to be able to provide for the basics, and social welfare doesn't come close to it. Now, again, there's sort of different arguments then about where welfare should be set, but it's nowhere near the poverty line, really, is the point we're trying to make here. Deprivation then is another aspect to poverty. It is measured differently. Really, poverty is about going without things. So for argument's sake, your income might actually be slightly above the poverty line, but you could still be experiencing deprivation. So in Ireland, deprivation means a specific list of 11 items. And if you're without a combination of those, you're classed as being, living in that sort of being deprived, living in deprivation. The rate of that is obviously higher because you might not be in poverty, but you could be living in deprivation. So what we saw was the rate there last year for 15.7%. And again, that doesn't really come as much of a surprise because of simply, the huge increases that we saw in our basic costs, the essentials: roof over your head, food on the table, your heat bill, your light bill, topping up your mobile phone, putting out your bin bags. All of those things, all of those costs went up. Accommodation, transport. When I say that, I mean kind of fuels as opposed to public transport. And what it means then is that people are really having to go without because they're having to make a choice between one thing or the other because their incomes haven't kept pace with the increases that we've seen in costs. Poverty in older people, I think again there was a disturbing statistic, which was that they saw an increase of 64% in the Silk 2023 and 2024 of those aged over 65, with that massive increase of people over 65 living in relative income poverty. And again, it just shows that it's that the failure of the pension system, the social welfare system, to keep up with those increases in costs. And it's unfortunate again because as a country, which is again a real success story, there are more and more and more of us over 65, and more of us will live to be older, and again older as each census moves on. So this is something that we will definitely have to get to grips with very, very quickly. And again, with the poverty and older people piece, what we saw was without those temporary cost of living measures, the poverty rate would have actually even been higher. So because we didn't see those temporary measures in the last budget, again, we had our own budget analysis, lots of other organisations doing budget analysis, but the Parliamentary Budgetary Office were out that very evening saying that according to the calculations that they run, that based on budget 2026, that they could see poverty rates will actually increase as a direct result. So again, if welfare rates fall behind, we can see there's a straight through line between anybody living in poverty who's linked with the social welfare system. They are reliant on social welfare. Social welfare isn't adequate. And again, to remind all of the time, we have anti-poverty commitments in the Roadmap for Social Inclusion, which is due to be renewed at the end of this year. There will be a new poverty target in that. This one wasn't met. And again, the Sustainable Development Goals, zero poverty by 2030. So much work to be done in the lifetime of this government. The focus of the publication was on really the impact of high prices on disposable income. And again, while the conversation is about rates of inflation slowing down, prices are not going back to the way they were a couple of years ago. So they are sort of two almost sort of slightly different conversations in one way. What we're seeing is, again, prices are not going down. Our electricity bills, our gas bills, our home heating oil, our petrol station costs, our food bills are not reducing. They're not going back to the way they were. Those prices are almost baked in. Our wages and our social welfare payments haven't kept in pace with those huge jumps in prices. And again, what we always see is that for low income households, those high rates of inflation were very, very difficult to deal with because, again, low income households spend more of their money as a percentage, and also they spend more of their money on the essentials. So it really, really hit those households much, much harder. And again, it makes sense when you look at when you sort of factor in, I suppose, the prices on things, that is really what the value of your income is what can you afford with it. So even if prices go up by €300 a week, but your income only goes up by 100 euro increase is brilliant, but it's not enough if prices keep outstripping it. We saw again, I suppose, Ireland's consumer price levels are quite out of line with other EU states. We have the second highest price levels in the EU. We do tend to pay more in most areas of our day-to-day spending. The health one is a huge, that's quite a disturbing plus 82%, but you can see it across the food and the energy and the communications, which I would argue would really be three of the most important ones that we deal with in our day-to-day lives. Poverty and housing tenure, and again, this makes total sense. Once you factor in your housing costs, we are all extremely well off before we factor in our housing costs. The SRI report there during the year that looked at children in poverty again also pointed out the shift in numbers once you factor in housing costs. And again, what's really, I suppose, sort of almost self-evident and feels right, but it's always good to have the numbers, is that it's renters who are being pushed to live below the poverty line because of the high costs of rent. And again, we see time and time again. I think I overuse the word again. I'm sorry about that, but it's the same things that we see over and over and over all of the time. In whatever way you come at these issues, whatever way you look at poverty, it's the lone parent household, anybody who's removed from the labour force, retired, people who live alone, anybody living with an illness or a disability. It's the same cohort over and over again, which means that we should be able to target those households more effectively. Hidden poverty, again, we always like to point this out. The Silk survey, and everybody's very aware of it, but it is just an element of it that it only captures those living in households. It is a household survey. So it misses many of those in society who would really be regarded as the poorest. So anybody who is without a home at the moment, anybody in temporary accommodation, B&Bs, hotels, and anybody living in congregated settings or institutions. So those, we would class them as hidden poverty. They aren't captured by the annual statistics. So they would probably allow us to view this whole issue through a slightly different lens if they were to be included. But obviously, again, it can be difficult because the Silk survey is carried on over a period of time. And if these households are I suppose on the move, sometimes anybody living in direct provision, anybody living in emergency accommodation isn't really in charge of where they live, unfortunately. So we appreciate that there can be barriers to this, but you would hope again that work would be done in order to try and include more and more of these as time goes on. As a result of that, I think as well, we are always calling for a move to persistent poverty to be the indicator. because what we can see, even though for children, especially for children, even the shortest or the a short length of time spent living in poverty or deprivation does have longer term impacts. The longer you are living in poverty, the more damage it does. And this is why we would like to see that persistent poverty piece really brought more to the fore, because again, that things like the mental and physical health impact of either having to struggle with money, being over indebted, having to go without if you can't feed yourself correctly, if you're having to sacrifice nutrition for empty calories, that's going to have an impact on your physical and mental health. Going without heat, not being able to be in a warm, comfy, safe environment is going to have an impact on your health. So this is why we would really like to see this. And again, it will show us the progress that we are or are not making. And then just to really finish off with a couple of policy priorities in here, again, it's about money. It's always about money. It is about more than money, but it's always about money. We really need to look at increasing the social welfare payments. The conversation at the end of or around budget 2026 was there was going to be a move away from the temporary measures toward a more long-term targeted. But what we saw then was €5 extra on the fuel allowance. We welcomed the increase in the child support payments as a targeted payment, but the levels of support, I think we would have liked to have seen much more money going into this system. And as we keep saying as well, savings or perceived savings in the social welfare system don't exist because the costs are simply borne somewhere else in the system. We can see that time and time and time again. We are looking for equity of social welfare rates so that any of those who are on the reduced rate, depending on their age, that they would be reinstated and that it would be the same payment made across the board. Adequate payments for children. We are slowly moving that way. We didn't see an increase in child benefit, but we did see an increase in the qualified child support. So that's really, really important. The issue of the working poor is still ongoing. The percentage is pretty much stubborn over quite a considerable length of time. We would recommend refundable tax credits as a way to deal with that. The answer to poverty is always go get a job. That's always the policy solution there. And what we're seeing more and more and more is people going out and getting a job and still struggling and still living in poverty. So we really need to look at how do we best use policy and the taxation welfare system in order to support those households. Huge argument then obviously for decent rates of pay for anybody in low paid work. So the move away from the minimum towards the living wage, a universal state pension. I'm conscious we are all due for auto enrollment come January, but we would be advocating for a universal state pension and obviously a cost of disability payment. A huge amount of work has been done, reports and submissions and papers, and yet we don't see it. We don't even see a beginning. The one-off payments that were being paid over the cost of living crisis, I suppose, for want of a better term, did acknowledge that there were extra costs linked with having a disability or an impairment, and that society should shoulder some of those costs along with the households. But we didn't see any cost of disability payment in the last budget, and we really would have liked to have seen one. So again, there will be, excuse me, a few more recommendations in the actual documents themselves, which again, I would encourage everybody to read. And thank you very much. And we can have questions and answers if anybody has any. And if not, what we can do then is, as I said, people are free to go for their sandwich. Now I just see if there's anything in the Q&A there. I'm not seeing anything at the moment, which is good. That means that everybody knows everything, which is fantastic. I suppose I'm conscious that for a lot of it, again, I can't access the chat, so if anybody does have questions, that they go into the Q and ask the Q&A bit of it. But for many of you who are in the sector and who are working in this, a lot of it does feel very self-evident, and a lot of it is numbers that we can trot out off the top of our heads. But it just, from our point of view, it's always really important to keep reminding government to keep reminding policymakers, and I suppose to keep reminding the public as well, that there are huge cohorts of society who are really going to struggle as we come into as we come into the winter. So I think that's very, very important. Um, Sorry, there is a question here about refundable tax credits. What does that mean and how does it work? It's probably maybe slightly more complicated than I'm going to cover now in answering the question. But what you've got is, if you're on a low income in the annual budget, you're, again, I'm kind of stuck in the past, your tax-free allowance, or the amount of money that you can earn without paying tax on it, that will increase ever so slightly every year. It's usually indexed, there's usually an increase. But if you don't earn enough to be able to access and take advantage of that full length of, or that full amount of tax-free credit, you are no better off as a result of the taxation measures in the budget. So what we would really like to see is that if you don't earn enough to be able to take full advantage of your tax credit, that there would be a refundable element in that. Now, that is something that they already do for business. There are refundable credits that are available to industry and to business, and that the same system could apply to those in low income households. Again, it would make a low income job pay more without putting pressure on business, because between one thing and another, you'll always get a pushback on that. And again, what you see time and time again when we talk about social welfare increases, we talk about cliff edges, we talk about work disincentives. So that would also do away with a lot of that that you would retain more of your earned income over the year. Again, so there would be different criteria and different ways of doing it, so that it's a little bit more complicated than I've kind of made out. But it would be feasible. It would be something that could easily be done by Revenue. Revenue is a government department that works extremely efficiently, and to bring together, I suppose, those more that kind of in-work support as well, I think would be really, really important through the taxation system. And what you can see sometimes is that business is incentivized by giving it money, and individuals are incentivized by taking money away from them. So if it works for one, it should be able to work for the other. So I was that it would that's how we would see that working. Again, sorry, I think there's a couple more questions here. The appropriateness of the 60% calculation on median income, it is always up for discussion. And I know in our document we use the 50% line and the 70% line as well. I there's definitely pluses and minuses for saying that poverty is a line, and that it's linked, if you're above it or below it, that you're not at risk of poverty, or you are at risk of poverty. If you're a 5 or over the line, are you no longer considered to be at risk of poverty? Officially, you're not going to show up in those statistics, but as we can see from the deprivation rates, you are more than likely going without. I suppose at the moment it is the indicator that's used. It allows us to compare across Europe how accurate it is, I suppose, to really reflect what it costs to live in Ireland at the moment. Again, is a debate, and I know that there are discussions about updating the deprivation indicators as well to make them much more 2025 relevant. But at the moment, I think you've got a couple of different figures. So for us, we're looking for 27.5% of median average weekly wages to be the level that social welfare is set at. You've also got arguments for the minimum essential standard of living, that welfare is set at that. You have, if you go bankrupt, the ISI, the Insolvency Service of Ireland, will use what's called a reasonable living expense calculator, which is linked to MESL. So there's that, where they have said under this level you shouldn't be. And then there's also that poverty level. So, I mean, ideally, if government was to seriously make a dent in poverty, then to eradicate poverty, you would bring every household up. You would immediately say, okay, if the poverty line is 366, welfare needs to be at 366. I can't see that happening, but it would be interesting to see how much of an argument you could make for it. But I think it is the line that's used, it is the line that is agreed. And I know when you look at the 50 and 70% again, how that it does tend to shift the whole lens. But again, the value of your income is really just what it can buy you. And as somebody said before, you'd have poverty in paradise depending on where that line is. So there will always be somebody below the line wherever you draw it. So it's really a case of trying to make sure that the line is as accurate as possible. Thanks for that, Dave. And I see there's a comment there. Yeah, from Morris, just like the foster carers, like that's a whole, I mean, we could do days just on that whole area, kind of kinship care. There's a lot, there's big gaps there about care, I suppose, in general, and care for our families in general, and the supports that we're getting or not getting in order to be able to care. And obviously, I mean, I can't imagine like foster carers deserve so much respect and so much thanks for from a societal point of view for the incredible work that they do. Um, and I've no doubt that there are plenty of organisations who are advocating on that. But thank you for pointing that out. And again, anybody else on the call who's working in these areas, um, will hopefully be able to take up that baton. But that is the thing about care in general. We had our conference last week before, time has lost all meaning, I'm afraid, sorry. But looking at care and that the importance of care. So all economic activity can only happen because of the unpaid, undervalued care that happens within households. So that's really, really important. And it's presumed again that I will care for my child out of love for free. I will care for my wider family out of love for free. But once I need to outsource that care for my parent, for my child, for somebody in my household who might have ongoing care needs, it gets really, really, really expensive. So if we do need care, and we maybe have to remove ourselves from the workplace in order to provide that care, definitely, Morris, I couldn't agree with you more. The system and the state do really need to look at the cost of care and the supports that need to be put in order to make sure that carers aren't also living in poverty purely because they're looking after somebody, which is what we want households to be able to do. And again, to do it out of love, I suppose, would be a corny way of putting it, but to be supported financially to be able to provide that care would be really, really important. So thank you for that. I don't know if there's any more come through there. That's probably it. Again, I'm conscious we're probably up to the half-hour mark anyway. I know I had probably set the Zoom up for an hour, but I didn't expect anybody to sacrifice their sandwich for that length of time. So unless there are any more questions, I may bring proceedings to a halt now in a minute. Again, the document should be on our website. Use it in your advocacy work. You know where we are. Please keep in touch. You know where I am. Any ideas or questions or comments or queries or a good old-fashioned ding-dong debate, always happy to have one of those. And I will say thank you very, very much for joining us. Hopefully, if I got the tech to work correctly, this will be recorded and it will be uploaded so that we can always refer back to it as well. Okay. Thank you all very much. Have a great week. And 4 weeks to Christmas. Happy Christmas. Happy New Year. Thank you.